Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Musings. Musings? What am I, a fucking cow? Musings. Jesus, Mitch making me nervous. I have my good friend Mr. Mitch Pike on the podcast show today. Thanks for joining me, Mitch.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, before we get started and talk about, I don't know, anything that comes up, I've got a few things that I wanted to sort of bring up today and sort of see where it goes. But if you could give the listeners a bit of a background for you. So obviously, what you do now and make sure you obviously come into that point, but also a bit more of your background and how you came to be who you are today.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we've got like an hour. So
cool. All right, so my name is Mitch. I own a gym in Canberra called Metamorph.
Mm-hmm.
Where did I start? I started in Anytime Fitness, actually. So after a few different career changes, I guess you could say, total about 25, I reckon, up until I was 24. I think was the turning point.
Okay.
Got into a bit of an incident where I believe that fitness was going to be sort of the way forward, or the way forward out of a particular situation, and I guess I fell in love with not only what it gave me, but also it gives me a purpose, and I think that's one thing I always struggle with was, what am I here for? I'd always ask myself, I'd be the curious one at the front of the class that would break shit and ask a lot of questions, and I think it gave me a purpose to move forward. And when I saw the benefits that I could help other people, I think that really sparked the fire, and it's been a pretty cool journey ever since. Opened up Metamorph when I was 25, so 4 years ago up to a couple of days ago, so it's been about 4 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And within that time, I was full-time at uni for a little bit, and went back a few times, found out that the theoretical component wasn't necessarily my jam.
Right.
I like to ask the questions and then apply it straight away, and I just found it just wasn't my style of learning. And as much as I didn't like it, I kept going back, and I really wanted to do it, but it didn't end up coming to be. That led me on a path of discovering one of my mentors, Keegan Smith, and did a little bit of work with him, more through the strength and conditioning and the fitness world and the self-development world. And then found another mentor in Alice Hameley, and learnt all the ins and outs of human behaviour and stuff with like metaphysics and quantum world and all that sort of thing. And that's been a good ride ever since, and that's been the thing that I've sort of ventured into more so than any other subject or topic, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Started powerlifting, and that was a big part of my life, and it's an identity that I've only sort of let go of about a month ago, and we'll go into that further as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess leading on from that, dabbled in a few other different types of sports, but always found my way back to lifting heavy. And I always loved the science behind strength training, and I guess the art as well, and reading and discovering new ways and new methods in which to do things, and taking things to the extreme and doing things like squatting every day and max squatting twice a day for a month, and trying different programs. And I always like to get my feet wet or dive in head first into something, which is both a blessing and a curse. It gives me the opportunity to experience things first so I can then teach it. Ultimately, I feel like my purpose on this earth is to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to teach, I need to learn, and in order to learn, I need to have the experiences. And I think the thing that held me back as a kid is I didn't like to put myself into a situation where I didn't feel like I could predict the outcome. So I was very much driven by the need of certainty for a long time, and I guess now it's very different. And different's good. I've learned to embrace different, and then I guess this is what we're here today, and the journey continues, I guess.
Yeah,
start of a new journey.
So we've caught up many times. There was actually obviously about a year, just over a year, I think, but when we just didn't catch up at all, and which is considering we live in pretty much the same town, in the same industry, and then you posted something, and I asked something, and I was like, "Oh, if you want to catch up for coffee? Let's catch up for coffee." Which was good. And then literally the next day, I saw you again. Which is kind of uncanny, and I was like, "Oh, okay, we should probably catch up a few more times." I think I'm the kind of person that picks up on things like that and sort of go, well. Just because we didn't talk, there might have been particular reasons at the time, but I think there's also a divergence of understanding that we need to make sure that we're focusing on what we personally need to focus on. And you've been. I remember when you first started working with Alice, right? And I've done a little bit of work with Alice, and then sort of moved on. And she was an influence for sure, and I think it started a deeper search for me. But you've had some incredible insights that you've shared with me that after I probably didn't tell you, but after talking to you, I'd leave and it would really sit with me, and I'd sort of think and I'd pull apart, and I'd sort of see how either I saw that or didn't see that, and how that would apply to me, and so forth. And I think sometimes I know I do as well, but I think sometimes maybe everyone, we sort of underestimate how much those conversations can actually really leave somebody impacted. So I would say you've had a lot of self-reflection, especially when you said, held me back as a kid. Like, can you go a bit more into that? Because I know there's things that you've looked back into your youth and realized you're like, and I know I've done this as well, and you're like, fuck, right, that's where I still do this. And give me an example of what you mean there.
So, I guess one of the biggest thing was probably when I've told this story before. I finished programming one night out at the gym, and I sat down, and it was probably one of the first live videos not live, but 40-minute length videos that I've ever done. I just sat an iPad there, and I'm like, all right, one of my biggest fears was judgment or criticism. So I always moved away from the word no. And I chased the yeses, and when you chase the yeses, you only ever put yourself in situations where A, you can be a people pleaser, or B, you're not really following your truth, or speaking your truth. That's how I see it.
Sure.
So, but when I was in year 3, we had like the gifted and talented class. It was a mathematics day, and there was 3 of us that went, and we went to this school in Queanbeyan, and there was this whole bunch of kids, and everyone was competing on the day, blah blah blah, and
competing in mathematics.
I think it was mathematics or science or something like that. But they'd take 3 of the smartest kids from each school, or in each year group, and they'd put everyone together, blah blah blah. And I remember this chocolate egg sitting on this bench. So curious cat went up, touched the egg, broke the egg, and there was a lot of kids there and a lot of teachers. Next minute, this teacher just starts hammering me and just ridiculed me in front of everyone, and it was one of the most distraught moments when I look back on it. And I forgot about this for a long time, and then when I started to venture into the world with Alice, and she asked me questions and all this sort of thing, it came up, and I was like, holy shit, that one moment where I was curious enough to sort of lead and go, okay, what's this? Asking questions, I'll find out for myself, was the moment that I felt like I pulled back as a kid. And from that moment on, I was never first in anything. And from under 6s, 7s, 8s, I was always really good at footy, best and fairest, etc. And I think that went on for 4 years. And then I swear after that point, it was just, I always put myself second. And I look back at that now, and I'm just like, one moment of just pure fear, where I was ridiculed or criticised for being curious, or for essentially, I would look at it as standing up and leading. And I genuinely believe that for the next 20, close to, or maybe 15 years of my life, I never led. I always waited and followed other people, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody liked me. That was important to me. I didn't want to let anyone down, and I'd just do things, and it's not speaking your truth, but it's also lying. I'd just do shit to make sure that people would affirm me, and would say that I was okay. And in many ways, I just feel like I never developed the internal instinct to go, okay, you're doing a good job. I'd make sure I checked with the world first.
Yeah, check with an authority.
Yeah, check with someone who's not me. How am I doing? And my happiness or value would be based on what other people thought of me. And I guess it just got to a point, man. I'd go through different careers. I was like, this isn't for me. Got into the security world. I mean, the need for certainty. And I get into the security world. It's funny. And I look back at that. I'm like, I was in it for like 5 or 6 years, man. I was like picked up when I was 18. And like, do you want to be a bouncer? I was like, yeah, hell yeah. And I was like, oh, this will give me some significant
status.
People, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's really the only reason why I did it. It was just, and people saw it, and people who know me would go, that's not your true nature.
Sure.
Like, I'd be the one that wasn't the one that was, kicking people out or fighting or that sort of stuff. Like, fair, there was stuff involved with that, but I was always the one that would talk to people and go, everything's all good.
Sure. And for those that are only listening, not watching, like, you stand, like, how tall are you?
6'5".
6'5", so just a couple inches taller than me.
Yeah.
How much do you, why is that funny? and how much do you weigh?
At the moment, 116.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so about the same. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the reason why I point those out is, and we'll talk about identity at some point in this conversation anyway, but it's obviously easy to see the big guy.
Yeah.
And straight away there's a status thing with that as it is anyway. I mean, I say that as a person, like, I don't know, probably 5'9", 5 foot, on a good day.
Yeah.
Right, if I've slept long enough. But
with high heels on.
Yeah, that's right, if I'm lifting. But in that circumstance, it's sort of looking at it and going, I can see why it can be attractive to go into a role like that, because it's like, well, A, you get certainty, but B, it's like, well, I'm physically probably more dominant, and I take up more space, and so it sort of makes sense at that young age, especially for like status. I didn't even think about becoming a security guard when I was like that. I just would have been a short little angry man, and that's not a good solution for me.
Yeah.
So then what was the circumstance then? I mean, that sort of insight's pretty phenomenal, right? And I think we'll kind of come back to that as a story, and I'll share some of mine as well, because I've learnt in the last probably 18 months more than anything that the memories that I have that are just throwaway memories still are dictating how I observe things today. And it was just like, when I realized that, I was like, fuck, and I try and pull up a memory and pull it apart and see how it's dictating my behaviors in that today. It's pretty epic. But what was the moment then for you that you're like, oh, I'm going to go into fitness then? Because you do more than fitness now, clearly, but in relation to going in anytime fitness.
So one of my old careers was I did uni via correspondence at one point in time. I was doing security, did uni via correspondence, did 2 IT subjects, got HDs for those, and then got accepted into computer science down in Melbourne at RMIT. I was actually going to move to Melbourne, and my partner at the time, she'd just gone overseas for an extended period, and I feel like I played the role of little boy, and that relationship was more of like a mother little boy type thing. And I never really felt like when I left, or when I didn't leave actually, but I felt like I stayed because of that dynamic. I felt like if I had left, I would have been a little boy, and I was still a little boy at that age.
What age was this?
20, maybe 23.
Yeah.
I was probably a boy up until maybe a year ago. I reckon. Yeah. If I'm honest, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just things that I feel like we need to learn, and things that we're just completely not aware of. So in many ways, the career that I was in, or the job that I had was not little boy. It was more like man, security, all that sort of thing. I was training my body to be a man, but inside, mentally, I just didn't feel like what I was doing was. I wasn't really following my heart. There was no purpose to my life. I still feel like a little boy trapped, looking to break free, and I could never really break free. So one of the defining moments was when I was meant to move to Melbourne. I had everything packed up, and it just one day, I just woke up, and it was after actually a big bender. woke up and ran upstairs to my bedroom, and I started like hearing voices and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And I was feeling like really, really down, and I was like, "Oh, it'll go through. Like, it's obviously just a big weekend."
So when you say hearing voices, you mean in your head hearing voices?
Yeah. And this is pretty funny, but all I remember hearing is chocolate starfish for some reason. Now, chocolate starfish, I don't know where it comes from, but it's a limp biscuit. I'm pretty sure it's on a limp
hot dog
biscuit
flavored water.
Yeah,
there's a meaning behind that. I'm not sure what the meaning is.
Yeah, we should.
I'll look it up as we talk. Someone's listening right now, being like, "Don't Google that." I'm not keen on the word starfish, but keep going.
So all I remember hearing is chocolate starfish, and for 2 weeks I remained in that bedroom, and I lost 14 kilos. So I mean, right now I'm 116. At the time I was about 110. Oh, so maybe 106, 108, something like that.
Just to clarify, the chocolate starfish was what I thought it was.
What was it?
It's also known as the rusty bullet hole and the rusty sheriff's patch.
No.
Or the anus. So, yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, I thought it was that. Sorry, listeners, but I'm glad that that's all you could hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was other things, but that really comes to mind. So maybe that's going to be a significant thing in my life. So
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows?
It's already gone.
It was a poop time. That's what it was. Let's keep going.
I lost train of thought.
So you were talking about you lost weight.
Yeah, and so I was 106 at the time. I dropped down to 89 kilos.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. 89 kilos. So 16. I don't mind. Anyway, I lost a lot of weight, and 2 weeks didn't come out of my bedroom, and I really felt like something was. I was like, "What is this?" And I remember ringing my dad, and my parents thought they're like, "Oh, it's just a big weekend," and I was like, "No, there's something like seriously wrong." And yeah, I went down and saw this psychologist, and down at the shops, and I just walked in there and I just broke down. He's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, "What are you feeling?" I'm like, "Nothing." Like, I literally feel like nothing. I'm like, I just can't stop crying. And I couldn't explain the feeling. I've never felt like that to this day, but I generally felt like my whole world just completely blew up. And I remember pulling the plug on moving to Melbourne and thinking that all I had in my mind was everything that you do, you'd never finish and you never follow through. Mm. And I think that was just the breaking point of just when I decided not to go. I was just like, it's another thing that you're just going to be a bouncer. And I used to hear that a lot, like, and you're never going to do anything good with your life. And in many ways, I felt like I had so much potential. I felt like I had so much potential, but I never had direction or just the follow through. I just never felt like I had the discipline to follow anything through or know how to finish anything. Maybe I just didn't know how to finish at the time, and it was one. That's that noise you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's always unpredictable. Tommy next door is always on the tools. He's a mechanic, so every now and again it's just like a burnout, or not really a burnout, like a dyno or a drill. So yeah. Anyway.
And that was the hardest 14 days of my life. I remember I was in my bedroom, man, and my roommate at the time, I was lucky for him, love the dude. He was sort of with me most nights, and I just didn't leave my room, quit my job. I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And I remember, the one thing I do remember from it is I was so calm because I felt nothing that I was like, this is actually cool. Because usually I would walk around and my energy would be either super high or super low. And it was just about finding the balance between, I didn't ever want to appear too hyper because I didn't want people to, not like me.
Yeah, of course.
And this was still a pattern that was up until, 23, 24. So, and I saw this psychologist, and I was like, I felt like something was really wrong, and I thought I was going like having some type of psychosis. Like, I just kept hearing these voices, and when I went down to the psychologist guy, he put me on Zoloft, which is an antidepressant. And
Russian? Sounds Russian.
I'm not sure it is actually.
Soviet sports supplement.
Yeah, and he's like, look, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better, and that always stuck with me to this day, and I think about that a lot. And every time I'm going through shit, and I still do to this day, I'll always remember that things will get worse before they get better, which is okay with me because I know that the lessons that you learn post that will always be far more beneficial than the pain you ever experienced. And then after I saw him, he prescribed me this stuff. 13 days later, I went back to see him, and I was like, mate, I need to be off this because I'm dead set going to top myself. I'd never in my life felt a sense of just, it was like feeling absolutely nothing, but at the same time just not feeling so insignificant that you were just like a drop in the ocean. And it was, yeah, I've never been able to describe the feeling, but the experience was just one that, yeah, I just would never wish upon anyone. With that said, it was the greatest turning point in my life. He said to me, he goes, the thing that's going to move you forward is fitness. And I always liked training, but I liked bench pressing every day and, you know, the typical bro stuff, 3 sets of 10, that sort of thing. Just trained to get big, didn't really care about strength, etc.
Sure.
So I started training again, but when I went down to because I was so light and I looked like I was sick, which in many ways I was, I didn't want to be seen. So I'd go down during the middle of the day and I'd go and train, but then I'd start to get sick again. And I would get sick to the point of it'd come out everywhere and I'd spew and, you know, all the other stuff. And I didn't know what was going on, but I felt like my body was just rejecting the meds. And it took me a long time, but probably took me a couple of months to put the weight back on, maybe 2 or 3 months. But that was in June of 2014. So it was only 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And when he said I went back and saw him, and I was like, after the 13 days, and I said, look, I'm getting off these. He's like, please stick with it. And I was just in tears every day, but I felt nothing. It was a really weird sensation. And then it started to get a little bit better, and I started to be able to down food. And all I drank for 2 weeks was banana protein shakes from Bulk Nutrients. Shout out to Bulk Nutrients.
Yeah, plug.
And that's all that would go down, but it would never stay down. But I couldn't eat whole foods, like it just wouldn't go down. And after that, I just started training again. And he's like, you know, fitness is going to be the way forward. And at that time, I believed that fitness saved my life in so many ways. And I was like, man, I'm going to become a PT. And I was like, this is given my life purpose. So I felt like I spoke about it yesterday, like a rubber band. It was like I felt like I was getting pulled back so far out from where I was, just to create that contrast effect of getting flown as far forward as I could. And I was so blessed. I was like, holy shit, I've found a purpose. I can do something with my life. Like I can contribute. And that's, to this day, one of my highest values is contribution. And people who know me know that if I'm not writing or if I'm not active, that there's something wrong. And yeah, after that, I was like, all right, I haven't squatted a day in my life. I'm 23 years old. I was built like a lollipop. I used to cop
one of those V lollipops.
Yeah, man, like a
one of the
lollipop.
Ones that like Kay and Nonnas would give.
Yeah, that guy bench presses every day. But he definitely doesn't squat.
Yeah. You do arm squats.
Yeah, arm squats. So I started squatting, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to wear shorts as a PT. So let's start squatting. So I started training every day, and started to feel a lot better. And started my PT certs. Started that, and I remember we had to do a mock-up thing where you write down what you'd love to do, what business you'd like to have, and I said I'd like to have Pike's Performance, blah blah blah. At the time, I was like, I'll never own a gym. Like that's so far out of my realm of reality. I was just like, I just want to get in the gym and PT.
Yep.
And then after that, at the end, and still related back to my self-worth, at the end of the course, you have a sheet, and people write down what they think about you. And I was getting mine, and people were like, you are so smart. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not smart. Like, what are you guys talking about? And that comes back to me a little bit still to this day, is I feel self-worth was always a thing of I didn't actually know or didn't feel like I was talented. Or I felt like I was, but I didn't think that I was, intelligent. I didn't view myself how other people viewed me in any way, shape or form. And when they said that, I was like, oh, maybe I am. And then that sort of set me on a thing. I was like, all right, I'm going to become PT. Got a job. I was pretty lucky to get a full-time job, actually, at Anytime Fitness, which was pretty cool. And did that for a year. And in that time, met Keegs, did 12 months with him, and that was the rest is sort of like a downhill slope, or an uphill slope, I should say. But it was very, very fast. Like I progressed very quickly based on the mentors that I had, Keegan and then obviously Alice, which I'm very grateful for. Like surrounding yourself with people that, at the time, I was like, this guy's a superstar. And he's like, do you want to do a 12-month mentorship with me? I was like, hell yeah. And then, a couple of years later, or a year later, I had a gym opened, and then 18 months later I travelled the world with him, and then 2 years later we're now presenting together. So that was cool. I don't think about that a lot, but it's pretty cool, I guess, to look back on that. And then I met Alice, and
how did you meet Alice?
So one of our mutual friends, through Mario, and he was down in Melbourne. I did a business, like a marketing thing with him.
Yep.
And Alice was there. She taught for one day. And I've never fallen in love with a particular subject than I did with that of what she teaches. And people ask her, like, what does she do? And I was like, look, I cannot actually explain what she does. There's so many elements of it. I'd like to she's called a human behavioural expert. She hates that term, but it's just human behaviour, and essentially why we do what we do, the strategies behind how to, I guess, change the way we do things. Essentially why we do things, and then how to change it.
Sure.
So it's changing behaviour.
Yeah. Mapping things also back to, and this is just a strand of that, I suppose, mapping things back to potential childhood patterns that are, effectively we're still running today. And that's one of the things a lot of the times people are... you look, for example, for that approval, at some point that helped you as a child, and so the need to do it again as an adult is because it worked. That's the thing that I learned, is that behind every behaviour is a good intention, right?
Yeah.
And even talking someone out of something that they should probably do, there's a positive intention behind it. The issue is that it may not be long-term positive, so to speak. Maybe there's a short-term subconscious pattern to it, but behind every behavior is that positive intention. And when we can see that for ourselves, and we start to look back and go, well, when did this quote-unquote unresourceful behavior that is now unresourceful, well, when was it resourceful, right? Because I call them bad habits now, as we all do. It's like, I've got bad habits. It's like, yeah, but at some point they were good habits, otherwise you wouldn't have fucking done them. At some point, being angry at something so significant was a way that you didn't get beaten up at home. Yeah. Like, it's just shit like that. And so it's really having that sort of self-reflection, and someone such as Alice. And I know, like I said, I work with Alice, and that was one of the things that, like, dude, leaving Alice up, like, I did 2 full days with her, and leaving Alice the first day, she doesn't know this, I drove home. She was in Northern Beaches, Sydney, and I was like, I'm not staying in Sydney. I'm driving home. And I was fucking in tears, like, for like I was raging, man. And it was just like, I think there's a lot of carryover for both our stories in many different ways. And it was just like, I just remember raging. I was so angry, and it was like, even then, it doesn't even make. It didn't make sense then, and I look back now and I'm like, oh, it makes heaps of sense of why I was upset about that, and everything. But I just like it literally just shook my world, and I obviously do all my work through the coaching room now, and my coach Jay is through there as well, and they're both, what Alice does and what they do is similar, but at the same time different. Yep. But it's interesting as that continual developmental work, and this is interesting because it goes into the idea of self-help or personal development. It's like, first thing, it's no one else's job to help you. That's one. So shut the fuck up and do the, as I say, it's like continue to excavate your mind, so you understand the reasons why you do what you do today. And in doing so, you're able to actually free yourself from the bullshit that you believe that encourages you to behave in a particular way that is no longer resourceful. Yeah. And a lot of the time they're our blind spots because they served us. Because if we didn't have, and understanding that, having people there to help point that out and ask the questions to bring forward the beliefs that we have in our subconscious, and we just like, well, because otherwise, I remember this. So, for example, it's starting a podcast. I talk about this in February because it's an obvious one because I'm on the podcast. Yeah. Right. But it was, I remember talking to Jay, my coach, and I spoke to him and he said, sort of pulled it apart and why I hadn't started, or my concerns were about starting it, right? And I'm like, well, you know, being effectively shunned by the industry. As a couple of questions, I got to shunned by the industry. And he's like, by the whole industry? And I'm like, right. So I've got this idea that the whole industry is there shunning me. This is an image I had in my head. And they're like, and what happens then? And it's like, well, I suppose. And I've never gone this deep. I've like opened a door, walked through that really fucking dark, awkward room. Oh, look, another fucking door. Let's open this bad boy. Oh, what do you know? These are my shadows. Right? And so doing that, and he's like, what happens if that happens? And I'm like, well, I guess one of two things. Like, what does it mean? He actually asked. I'm like, I guess one of two things. One, I may as well drink cyanide. I have no idea. I've never said that before. And he's like, cyanide, so death. And I was like, well, if you just hear me out, I was going to say I'm ahead of my time, but whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, can you hear that? Can you hear how you making a mistake equals death?
Yeah.
And he's like, so where did that come from? Yeah. And I sort of sat there and I'm thinking, and like I've got 3 older sisters and they all love my nan, and I love my nan as well. I thought maybe because I was youngest, I didn't see my nan heaps when I was young compared to my sisters, and so they had a much better relationship with her. And like, nan's lovely, and I do love nan, but the sisters have a much stronger relationship with her. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's just because I was literally thinking this the week before. I don't know why I was thinking this the week before this conversation. And then he's like, I think I know where it comes from, and he was leaning in towards particular issues that I may have with my mother, right? And people don't talk about this shit, but it's just like they joke around about daddy issues or mama's boy, whatever. It's like, but there's actual psychological things that are associated with our mother and our father, or the masculine and feminine figures. And I was like, no, it's not. I go, it's from my nan. And he's like, okay. And I remember that the only movie memory that I have of my nan, right? I've got sort of images, but the only movie memory I have of her, I had a bouncy ball and I was playing with it in the living room, and it went behind the TV set, right? And I was like 6. So I went to go behind the TV set to get my bouncy ball, and she's like, Dave, don't go behind there. She's like, because if you make one mistake, no more Dave, right? And so I get electrocuted. What am I going to fucking lick the socket? But anyway, like, you know, in that circumstance, that's the only fucking thing that I remember. I don't remember anything else. Like, I couldn't even pinpoint the year, but I remember being around 6, give or take 10 years, you know. But no, like, you know, give or take a year. So in that circumstance, it's like it's associating a mistake with death. And I was like, well, hang on a sec. Like, what about me starting my business? I remember thinking, if it doesn't work, I'll just go to uni. He's like, yeah, you gave yourself permission to fail. But when you don't give yourself permission to fail, when you're no longer the authority, a mistake equals death. Because that's the meaning you made about mistakes. And I was like, fuck, right. And understanding that actually allowed me to lean into mistakes more often, and sort of seen this construct that I had built that saved me from electrocution at that age, right? My nan's positive intention, hey, like, don't touch that. But she fucking classic stitch up for 20 years. You know? But in that circumstance, there's a lot of things that happen that we can remember in our youth, and that's the whole idea of coaching. And so this is my conversation in the fitness industry. It's like, how many PTs don't realize they're just projecting their own goals onto their clients, right? They're like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, dude, would I be lying if I wasn't at some stage, right? Or it's like, you know, it's like, yeah, okay, we're going to, you know, help you lose weight. And all right, so what we're going to do is put a weight belt on you. We're going to squat as heavy as we can. It's like, she's fucking 43. She needs to be able to, she doesn't need a handstand. She doesn't need to fucking try and get a CrossFit open score or, you know, compete in a fucking... Doesn't need to do that. She can. That's fine. I'm not saying she shouldn't or he shouldn't. I'm saying she doesn't need to and he doesn't need to. And so what our role is as a coach is to make sure that we're not projecting any of this sort of shit onto our clients. And it's interesting with my seminar. So I run the 1-day seminar and a 3-day seminar. And the 1-day one is like, let's learn how other people learn, and let's learn how to communicate to other people, with a constant dripping of, how the fuck do you learn? Do you think in pictures or do you think in words? Right? Whereabouts in your head do you think? Do you know there's 2 things in your head? The one that's thinking and saying something, and the one that's listening. And it's like, so what is that? Right? And then in the 3-day, we really pull the individual apart and go, this is where the connected coaching actually occurs, because you aren't able to connect with someone unless you actually know who you are. Because then you're not actually connecting with them. You're connecting with the person you're trying to be to please them. And that's... I like it. Yeah, it's sort of... When I understood about myself, I was like, oh, fuck. Same as you, man. How many people am I trying to get approval from? Right? Like, let me just check my likes on my Facebook post.
Yeah,
you know,
I went through that as well.
And it's not like I still have an element of that, but it's like, I think a lot of people don't talk about the context or intent. And so before, the intent was because had conditional esteem. Whereas, and it's like, okay, if I get X amount of likes or this or that, I never really took posts down. I don't think I ever did that. But I was like, oh, they don't like that, so I won't do that again. I had to look at them like, no, that's authentically me. Or at some stages it wasn't, obviously. But it's like, if that's authentically me and people don't like that, or they didn't actually just double tap it, what does that got to do with anything?
Yeah.
And so I was like, God damn it, I've got to go camping again. Look at the
stuff. And that's a social media world, right?
Yeah, well,
Show
it's just
us your highlight reel.
Yeah, it is, right? And so this is a like, social media is bad. It's like, no, it's not. It just exposes what you are.
Yeah.
It's almost like a shadow exposure. It just exposes the shadows of the darker parts of your personality that you may not even be able to see. Yeah. And I look back, I see memories pop up. I'm sure heaps of people do that.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, God.
Yeah.
I remember writing that, and I remember the thought that I had about writing that, and I'm like, oh, God, that was the wrong intention.
Yeah. So funny. I wrote a post about responsibility just before I met Alice. And one of the first things she taught me was when we were down there. And I remember the moment that she goes, okay, nothing's external. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, nothing's external. She's like, anything that you see in your world is you. You can only see that which is in you. And I was like, but this person in my life is this, and this person in my life is that. She's, no, that's you. And I was like, wait, so you're telling me that that's not them and it's me? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember I was going, I've now understand the key to life. I was like, everything's simply a mirror. So I remember going back to the gym, going back to clients and speaking to people, and I'm like, you'll never believe this, but did you know the world was like this? And from that moment on, I was just like completely hooked. And I realized that my whole life I was chasing answers when really all I needed to do was focus on asking better questions. And Tony Robbins speaks about it all the time. It's just like the answer to your question lies within a better question that you haven't yet asked. And all our problems in lives are just unanswered questions. So it's like, what question don't you yet have the answer to? And phrase it like that. And then when we start asking questions, and we're like, oh. And when we spark the question, we start to create doubt. And doubt is obviously, could say this like the contrast of something that's certain.
Sure.
And the thing is, what I've found with certainty is it stunts growth. Yes, it moves you towards something, perhaps. But as soon as a belief is actually a belief, it's actually a limit. So even our goals are limits. A belief is a limit. Because it also means that there's no other possible option because you are so certain. And an answer just gives us certainty. Science gives us certainty. Art gives us doubt, gives us a question. But what if the world was like this? That's why philosophy and all that sort of stuff, I feel like that's the way to the life's like, what's life about? All the, like, how good of a question could you ask to move you towards the next stage of life? And I always feel like the next stage of your life is hidden within a question of another question. It's just about upgrading your vocabulary of or your arsenal of questions.
It's really interesting with the idea of questions, right? And when we can, for me, it was a powerful thing when I get that, but when I understood it, like the embodiment of it was different. But also understanding then the lesson that I had to learn on top of that was to be okay with whatever the answer was when I asked a question, right? And make sure that I wasn't setting myself up for a question because I was trying to lead myself to an answer. It's like, I had to ask the question and be completely curious about whatever arose after that question, rather than going, well, whose fault is this? Something like that, right? Yeah. But I had to be able to go, okay, well, what part of their personality do I have? And then the first thing I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that I am narcissistic, or I do have this element, or I do have that element. And this is the interesting thing, because this is probably tied to identity. It's like someone goes, for example, like, oh, I am narcissistic. It's like, no, you are. You go through bouts of narcissistic behavior. You are not a behavior. Yep. In the same way that we're not an emotion. So when people go, I have anxiety, it's like, well, maybe another way to frame that sentence would be, I do anxiety.
Yep.
Right? Because we don't have emotions, we do emotions. And often they're a reaction, which means that we've taught ourselves that action and we're just redoing it.
Yep.
Right? And it's sort of interesting when talk about the powerlifter side of things, and being able to go, people say, oh, for example, Dave is a podcaster. He's a gym owner. He's this. He's that. I'm like, no, I'm not. They're the things that I do. I'm not those things. And it's like, otherwise, when I'm angry, guess what? I'm now anger. I am the embodiment of anger, as opposed to understanding that I experience it and I get to choose my response. And if you want to learn how to snatch a barbell, it's going to take time. If you want to learn how to master your emotions, it's going to take a lot of time. And in fact, it's going to take much longer than learning how to master someone else's. So, and that's why self-mastery is, it's a fucking black belt. Yeah.
I mean, look how much knowledge there is to gain in the world, like, especially in our industries. Like, people do this or do that. And it's like, most people say the same thing. It's just delivered within a different context. And you can understand something. And I used to go to places and be like, yeah, I've heard that before. And when I started with Alice, I don't feel like ever since I met her, I've never been to a course or listened to something and gone, yeah, I already know that. Because it's always in a different context. And the things that you hear, unless you're implementing them, then you don't actually understand it. Because it's just simply, it can be knowledge, but it's not wisdom. It's only wisdom once you do something with that knowledge. It's
repeatedly.
Like, what's the point? Yeah. It's like where you're consistent and you have a result. And if you don't have a result, then you don't know. And I feel like I've explained this before as you've got a question mark and an exclamation mark. And when people come to help, they go, I can't do this or I can't do that. And one of the things we learned was to simply lead with certainty, but finish or close with a question. So if someone said, for example, I can't do this, you'd say, yes, you can, blah, blah, blah. And then what if you could, for example? And all that does is, if someone is leading with certainty and said, I can't do that, when we lead with certainty back, say, yes, you can, it challenges their belief, which means that they don't want to feel uncertain. So they'll just keep challenging you with certainty.
Sure.
So what I like to do is then lead with the question and you lead with uncertainty to balance that out. And all of a sudden it creates a point where they need to really question their belief. And I used to come from the frame of, I want to influence and you need to know this and you need to know that. I'm like, no, you don't need to know. But what you could do is, once I feel that you're questioning your belief, then change can occur. But so long as you still believe the things that you think or say about yourself, no change can really occur. That's why a question to spark someone that says, I can't do this, or this in my life is this, we'll do anything to fulfill that need of certainty. But if we finish with a question and then walk away, and I did this for probably 3 months, if someone goes, I can't lift that weight, and I'm like, what if you could? And I just walk away. And it sparked so many changes that it makes me smile to look back at it now. And we just had a thing of people around the gym were just going, what if you could? And we used to say it, and we just constantly say it. And it just started to, people have to question their beliefs and what it is that they actually know. And that's learning, is not knowing.
Well, this is the other thing, is that every little bit of learning is a little bit of death, right? Because we have to kill off our old beliefs to be able to let new beliefs come in, right? Otherwise, why would our beliefs change from when we're 18?
Yeah.
It's like we have to be able to look back and see growth, and with growth becomes a little bit of death. And the more that we resist death, the more that we resist living and growing.
Yeah.
And it's sort of interesting when we sort of really grasp that, and rather than going, I'm right, it's like, you're right and incomplete. And so when we can see that, we start to look at, we're right in this area with the map that I've created to understand reality, but clearly I'm incomplete in many other areas. So what could that look like? And that was one of the biggest things that I sort of learned, was going and looking at different angles and looking at it at right and incomplete. And that's a lot of Ken Wilber's work. And it was powerful in the sense of going, if I'm right and they're right, then how are we both right? It's like, well, because if I used your map and you used my map, we'd go, well, that makes sense. Of course it would, right? But when we let our ego get in the way of the truth, that's where it really truly becomes an issue. And we're no longer worried about the truth, we're worried about being right. And in that space, it's like everyone's wrong, right? And it's almost like the idea is, as soon as I think I'm right, I'm the furthest away from being correct.
Yeah.
And that's where I'll still catch myself. I'm like, fucking, I can be really stubborn. And I'm like, yeah, that. And then I'm like, God, doing that thing again. I'm like, people are looking at you. Cool. I'm happy to be wrong. But it was so interesting. And you talked before about, I already know this. And one of my favorite quotes is one of the fucking 4,000 I have in my head. But one of them is, no man ever steps in the same river twice, because the second time the river is different, and so is the man. And it's like, I actually heard that, I didn't understand it, and the second time I understood it, which is pretty funny, because that's exactly what the quote's saying. It's like, I may have heard this before, but now I'm a different human being listening to it again, with different experience and different understanding. And that made me go, like, right, okay, so as soon as I go, I know, I'm actually, and I think you might have even told me this, but I've heard it multiple times since. It's not. It's stopping.
Yeah.
It's like, I know, KNOW, but
same
the
as NO.
brain reads it as NO.
100%.
Because you don't go, I know, continue. I'm really listening and engaging and interested to learn, but I already know.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't occur. And so, I think the being open to that space of a little bit of death actually allows us to live, and to actually grow and it's kind of like a bell curve where we're like, fuck, I know nothing. And it's like, God damn, I know all this shit. Like, fuck, this is the way we should be living. Then later on, it's like, well, I don't know. Some people smoke joints, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, some people, starfish.
But I think one thing that comes to mind there is, they say the more certain you are, the more uncertain you are. And it's the same thing with like doing things to either move away from pain or move towards pleasure. But by moving away from pain, we actually move towards pain. So, like, because
break it down a bit
the whole
more,
pattern, So if we have pain, pleasure on one side of the page, and then we have pain on the other side, and we create like sort of like a curve or like a mound. You get what we focus on. Our language is our world, and that's why we've delved into language a little bit, and why we sort of study it as much as what we do. But by moving away from pain, your focus point, if I explain it like you've got a TV, and you can only listen to one channel at a time. So you're either positive or negative.
Is the cricket on? That's
So when someone goes, I'll give you an example. If someone goes, oh, but I'm not negative. Well, the focus point on your TV is negative. That's what the brain sees. Your brain doesn't take on board I'm not, because it distinguishes the words or the major words. Or if someone goes, oh, I don't self-sabotage. The focus point is still on self-sabotage. So if you're not negative, then what are you? I don't know, but I'm just not negative. Well, that's a lie. You believe that you're not, but the truth is you are, because it's still on your TV screen. So what you could do is create, all right, if you're not negative, then what are you? Oh, I'm positive. Good, and that's where affirmations can come in. And you to start with, you just what's not accepted cannot be rejected. So you need to accept who you are first, or the patterns that you do, or see them before you can actually reject them. So you have to become aware and say, look, I do fuck up, or I am negative. Okay, I'm looking to change it. And then the answer lies in what question you ask next. Not I'm not negative, because that's just going to keep you in the same loop.
Well, not is a negative. Right, so it's like hating hate. Oh, fuck, I hate hate. It's like, yeah, I can tell, buddy. Yeah.
So with that, if for example, we're still talking about if the negative is still on your TV screen, by moving away from negative, you actually move towards negative, because it's still on your TV screen. You actually, it's basically like walking away from the TV, turning around, but there's still negative on your TV.
Right.
So by moving away from pain, you actually move away from pleasure as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what we're seeking for in this life: is love, joy, happiness, family, or whatever our highest values are. The only way that we can move towards that is by establishing in life what we want, based off what we desire, based off our language. So the thing is, all we need to do is change the TV, and we are the remote.
Yeah.
You can change TV. You can watch TV at home, and you can watch the news. And one thing I quit was watching the news. All you see on the news is negative shit. And it's the same thing. You come in, you hear people, and all they'll talk about is their problems. Oh, works like this, works like that. You're like, no, you're like that. accept that you're like that.
Yeah.
Fuck, stop talking about work, man.
Yeah.
Like,
So, I understand it as we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are.
we are, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's looking at that and going, and like, that's a brain fuck if ever when I first, I was like, oh, hang on a sec. Something about that resonates, but I still don't quite get it. And I don't like that. So now I have to look at, like, let me just pull this apart and unpack it a fair bit. And that's where it's like, oh, work's super negative. It's like, yep, I bet it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet it's work.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And it's interesting when we talk about the not space, right? It's like, oh, I don't want this. It's like, I tell you what I don't want. It's like, yeah, it's literally going to a restaurant and be like, I just don't want the chicken schnitzel, thanks. It's like, yeah, but what do you want? It's just like, mate, I said I don't want the chicken schnitzel.
Yeah.
Whatever else is fine. It's like, but I would like to know what you want. And that's the universe responding, going, what is it?
Yeah.
And you're like, just not the chicken schnitzel. And the universe is like, that's fine, sir. I won't get you the chicken fucking schnitzel.
Yeah.
You're getting a chicken parmigiano, right? It's like, you're not just getting what you don't want. You're getting a bit of fucking cheese spread all over it. Go on, clean it up. Yep, indeed.
Yeah.
And like, that's just a lesson. It's like the universe keeps serving up the same lesson until you learn from it.
Yeah.
And it gradually gets cheesier. It gradually gets worse, right? And I think a good story I once heard was feather brick truck. First, it's a feather, and if you have the right self-awareness and the space to be able to see it, this feather's like, hey man, you know, be careful with that. And then it's a brick, and you're like, the fuck was that? That's sore. But if you keep moving forward, you get hit by a truck. You know, and you could look at your story from before and be like, you hit by a truck for 14 days in your room. That could be an example. I've been there. I've shared this story many times, and I wrote about it on the 1st of January this year, which is my birthday. And it was the 1st of January in 2015, and that's when I felt like I shook hands with the devil. And I will never forget that feeling. I'll never forget it at all. And I was by myself. I was house sitting and I was looking after a dog. I ate my fucking pizza. It was a bad day. And but I just remember going, I never want to feel like this ever again. And I wasn't suicidal. I didn't have a
command feel like this.
Yeah, right. And I also thought I never want my friends to feel like this. And that was really a space for me to start going, okay, I need to get out of this and go from there. But I wasn't suicidal. I didn't have a plan, but there was definitely this, like, it was like a multiple choice of 15, and one of them was definitely drive a car into a tree, drive it off a bridge. Like, that was definitely one of them for sure. Maybe not even 15, maybe 10. And I didn't want to do that, but it was attractive because it just was a, like, control alt delete, right? And it just deleted everything, deleted all the issues. But of course it deletes everything else that's running as well. And so I shook hands with the devil and saying, look, if I still write a book and I'm still useless and I'm still not, purposeful or fulfilled or whatever, then that's fair enough. I can end it there. And I was like, yep, cool. And I gave myself permission to do that. And it still hasn't eventuated, actually. This week I'm looking at publishers, as you know.
Awesome.
For my first book. And really cool opportunity through Publishizer. Big shout out to them, which is effectively a crowdfunding for authors. And so from there I was able to inch my way out of it. And this is the biggest thing to understand, is that it's not a straight road after that, right? And people are like, and you mentioned a story before, and you're in a much better position today, but it hasn't been a straight road.
Fuck no.
At all. And there's definitely, it's the same thing for me. Like, I have even at this I look back at my last 2 weeks, and my last, not even that, week and a half. There's been company things going on, like, not in a negative way, just company stuff going on, but then old business stuff going on. I got a lawyer contacting me, like, and it's like, fuck. But then I'm like, I'm about to sign a publisher deal. I've got a mentoring group that I work with that I fucking love. I have a fantastic team. I'm mopping my floors today, and I'm like, I choose to do this. I get to do it. I don't have to clean the mats. I get to clean the mats. And when I'm in that space, I'm not cleaning the mats anymore. I'm preparing a platform for people to come here and change their life.
Yeah.
And that really shifts the framework of what it is that we get to do every single day. And when we can give ourselves space to breathe and work with some individuals that on probably a high level consciousness that we are, we get to be able to see these things as they are, not as we are, and we get to change who we are in that circumstance, or at least choose who we are in that circumstance.
Yeah.
And that I believe that to be true self-power,
Yeah. You said it awesome before when you mentioned about seeing people as like pure, as in every behavior is meant with a positive intention. And that's one thing I feel like I've heard that for maybe maybe 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon I learned it maybe 6 months ago, and I feel like I only really got it last week.
Right.
And that was the biggest thing that came from it was every behavior has a positive intention behind it. Like even the worst behavior, even if you look at like natural disasters like hurricanes and all that sort of stuff, like it makes way for new growth. Like there's nothing in this world, no one can do wrong by you without simultaneously doing right by you at the same time. And it's just whether you like to live in curse or you like to live in the blessings. And I feel like everything that you ever need is dead set right in front of you. It's just like we were talking about the clock before and seeing certain numbers.
It's really interesting because this is something that I sort of like, I didn't struggle with, but I'm like, let me just pull that apart. Like, let me just throw it against the wall and see if it like just flops to the ground or bounces back. And it was kind of going, well, you look at the people that shoot up schools and school massacres, right? You're like, how is there ever a positive intention? But to them, in their reality, which may not be a healthy reality at all, and I don't think it is, there's actually a positive intention to them. They're trying to cleanse the world, right? And you see the letters written by these individuals, and they're like, death to all humans because they're scum. And what their positive intention is to cleanse the world of scum, right? Including themselves. They think they're the bad gene also. And it's just like, it's a horrible thing. And it's like, looking at the Graves level of consciousness, a lot of it's actually really green. There's still a lot of red, but which is it's in the top of the first tier of consciousness. The second tier goes into like Jim Carrey, right? So, but in that circumstance, it's just because what they see as the collective is more important, but it's just twisted and warped. But to them, they've got a positive intention behind a really horrible thing that is the darker parts of humanity. And this is one of the biggest things about integration, right? So people talk about positive and negative, and it's like as if it's bad. It's like, no, judging it is what's actually bad, but even that is judgment. And so understanding that if we do not integrate the darker parts of our personality, understand what we're truly capable of, and think about how would you react if you were part of the Nazi camp? Would you have been like, fuck you, Hitler? Nah, you would have been like, you would have probably fucking 99,999 out of 100,000 would have been, okay, play along. Let's get rid of scum. Yada, 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 yada. Right? And that's the reality. And that's like, that means that in Canberra, 3 people would have spoken up. And how many of those would have lived? It's understanding that if we can really see the evil that we are capable of, we actually stop the evil within us. It's when we reject, I could never be like that. I'm not aggressive. And they're passive aggressive as fuck. And they're sarcastic. And it's like, what you hate, you have. And when we can really sort of realize that what we hate, we have, and we sort of look at these sorts of parts of us, why do you think you fucking hate it? Because you see you in it.
And as you said just before, I'm not aggressive, I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm like, tell me what you're not, and I'll tell you what you are. And I feel like that's it.
I'm
I
not
feel
6
like
foot,
language. I feel like, language is our world. Like we create our world through what we talk about. And I feel like simple language changes are going to be like the way forward. I mean, you look at you see the world in say 10, 20 years or whatever, and robots can take over. So let's say every industry, but one thing they'll never do is be able to connect. And like the true, for us to connect as human beings or to feel like we matter, to feel like what we're doing is of purpose, we need to be able to connect in some way. And some people have the ability to do that, but choose not to, and they gain significance through blowing up a school, for example. When they die, they will be significant. And regardless of that's could be potentially why they do it. Like people, they're craving connection, they're craving meaning in their life.
Well, we seek love from the feminine, and we seek approval from the masculine. And actually, if you look at the statistics of the school shooters, it's something like 95% of them didn't have a father in the home. Like it's so crucial. Like it's crazy. And this is so. Dr. Warren Farrell wrote a book called The Boy Crisis, which actually talks about how a lot of these sorts of issues are occurring, and based on the fact that we're kind of leaving boys behind. I mean, I talk about this stuff a fair bit, not because I think, I definitely don't think feminism is the issue whatsoever at all, but what I'm getting at with this, it's like, it's the integration of all of us, not the separation, right? You watch the news, they're not trying to fucking integrate anyone. They're trying to separate us versus them, right? And because every society throughout history has always needed an enemy. Right, and when there's not wars, well, let's turn it on the genders then, shall we? And it's like, whoa, guys, like, no, let's work and develop together. Here's something that's really interesting around patriarchal and matriarchal societies. Throughout history, once again, it was, and this is just a short thing, I won't go into it too much. It's like the patriarchal and matriarchal society was heavily based upon what type of agricultural farming they had, right? A horticultural society could still use effectively a shovel and a hoe, whereas an agrarian society used a plow, right? So animals and what was deemed heavy machinery. Now, in the agrarian societies with the plow, the miscarriages when women worked when they were pregnant was significantly higher, right? Miscarriages were already high than what they are today, but they were significantly higher because women were working on heavy machinery and it was stressing the body. And so it was agreed upon for the best thing for the family that when the woman is pregnant, she didn't work on the farm. She could reproduce and the men would produce, right? Whereas in the horticultural societies, the females would actually be able to still work with a hoe and dig, right? And in that circumstance, the females would be able to produce and reproduce. And so the actual deities, the gods in the agrarian societies, 97% of the gods that people looked up to were male. Whereas in the horticultural societies, 97% of the gods were female.
No shit.
Right? And so this is Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Right? And because what it was that the feminine could both produce and reproduce. And so it was more so like for the females, and I'm not saying that females should be at home looking after children. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever at all. I do not believe that. What I do believe is that in a relationship, those two people have a common good to come together and see what's best for the next generation. Whatever that looks like, it doesn't matter. But what I do know to be true, and what has shown time and time again, is that a woman cannot raise a man, and a man cannot raise a woman, right? But a man can't raise a man, and a woman can't raise a man. It needs both. It needs the feminine, the divine feminine, and the divine masculine to be able to bring forward a healthy child, to be able to be a leader in the space. And if we don't have that, then there's issues around it.
Yeah.
And I've seen it through so many guys. I was one of them that grew up around without this sort of healthy masculine figure. And so I looked for approval in everyone, man. And when I shut my mum off, like I remember shutting her off emotionally, just shut her off. So she couldn't hurt me. And so I went about dating older, unemotionally available females for a very fucking long time. And it would just tear me apart. But they were just representing as my mother. And when I did that, I fucking sat in the corner and cried for like 4 days. Like, it was, it was like, God damn it, this is
the breaking point.
Yeah. But like that kind of shit is fascinating. It's like I had to see it not from judgment, but from understanding and compassion. Because if our compassion doesn't include ourselves, it's just not complete. And so it's fascinating. I find all that sort of stuff really fascinating and important to discuss.
Yeah.
But it's avoided because it's difficult or awkward or challenging.
Yeah, challenging for sure. I think understanding why we do particular things, like we mentioned judgment a little bit, and that's been a challenge that I've had this year. It was a big one with judgment. And then I read a book by Gabby Bernstein called The Judgment Detox. Epic book. I would highly recommend anyone who feels like they're going through like something in particular like that. And it just goes on about what judgment actually is and why we do it. And I think once you understand what something's there to do, what it's there to do, not why, but what it's there to do, like what it's actually giving you can then disidentify from the actual judgment itself. And one thing, I mean, we've got our thoughts, and then we've got what we believe. And the thought is not ours. I feel like the only thoughts that can ever come to us are the ones that people have said something through perhaps childhood or up until this day, and they're just circulating thoughts. And any belief that we choose to take on is our responsibility, but our thoughts aren't ours. And to be able to disassociate from that thought, you then don't identify yourself as anything ever or any of these thoughts. So I know, for example, like when I felt like I was depressed, and I was, in my world I was, and I look at it now, and this is how I look at it. This is how I look at most problems. I go, what's your problem? Let's say depression. Okay, what's the contrast of depression? What would be the opposite of that? And I'd say expression. Right. So tell me your challenge, ask yourself what the contrast is, and there's your solution. And I feel like we'll always move away from our solution to create enough pain in order to then rubber band us back to where the solution is. So one thing you mentioned before about that guy who said that the guy who shoots up the schools, and 97% of them, whatever, don't have a dad. what are they moving towards? They're moving towards love, for example. No, I don't feel significant. No one loves me, for example. But perhaps all they needed was actually some direction in life. So you always move away from where the solution actually lies. So for me, I was depressed. I was on those meds for like 2.5 years, and I wrote a post about this and got heavily ridiculed. And it was the first post ever written, and all the backlash that came, I was like, I actually don't give a fuck. That's the first post I've ever written and been like, this is me and this is the truth. And this was anything that came to me. I said, look, I accept your opinion. I'm like, this is just my opinion. And I feel like that was the turning point for me to let go of the thoughts that people said. And for me to, or for anyone to sort of move forward in the world, they're going to have to open themselves up to that sort of criticism. So all I really needed to do was express myself, and I wasn't expressing myself, therefore I was depressed. It's like if someone's going through all this self-doubt, right? Then the contrast of self-doubt is self-belief. So what don't you believe about yourself, or what do you believe about yourself? Because your solution is in your belief system. You may doubt yourself, and you can sit there and go, I doubt, but that's keeping you in the same looping pattern.
Well, your certainty about the doubt.
And certainty stunts growth. And you look at self-sabotage, another thing that I've had to deal with. And I feel so grateful to have gone through all these hard times, especially the last 3 months, because I've pulled myself out of one of the worst self-sabotaging patterns I had, and now I'm beyond it, which means I can now teach it based on experience, not on just I read it in a book.
Yeah.
So self-sabotage, the opposite of self-sabotage, what do you reckon it would be?
Freedom.
Yeah.
Self-expression once again.
Yeah.
So the opposite of self-sabotage, what do I think it would be if I really sort of thought about it? Give me a moment. We need like thinking music from Jeopardy.
So we'll take self, and then self would always be self.
So what you think
So
is
what would
self-belief?
the opposite of sabotage be? So if you're not sabotaging, what are you doing?
Well, to me, what comes to mind for me is just freedom, just permission.
Yeah. So what are you doing to yourself? What are you choosing to do to yourself that you're not doing when you're sabotaging?
You're going to have to help me out here with what you're getting at.
So what would be... So self-sabotage, what would be the thing that you're doing?
So you reckon love?
Self-love.
Self-love.
If you're self-sabotaging, you're not loving yourself.
Sure.
When you're loving yourself, you're not self-sabotaging. So the solution lies in love, like most solutions. So whenever someone's self-sabotaging, and they're like, it's not that you don't want it, it's that you don't believe that you're worthy of it.
Yep.
And it's just, so what can you do to love yourself? Well, you'd look at the things that you're maintaining in your life. So the things that you're maintaining, you're loving yourself because you're remaining consistent with that. So that's the first thing you'd look at, is just cleaning up your house. Now, from a behavioural point of view, so the wardrobe is related back to self-worth, and the bathroom is related back to self-care.
Yep.
So what you could do is clean your bathroom and clean your wardrobe, and then ask yourself, are you ready to self-sabotage again? Because you probably won't be. And we were talking about cars and stuff before. I have a dirty car all the time, and whenever I'm not organised, I used to hate it about myself, but I probably hated that I loved it. And I remember speaking to Alice about it, and I'm like, I'm so unorganised and it drives me insane. She's like, well, what's the benefit of being unorganised? Like, I don't know, I don't think there is one. Well, she's like, it shows that you're actually getting work done. And then when you're unorganised, then there's an opportunity for you to become more organised again. And I was like, oh, okay, it's just a process. Yeah, I love that I'm not organised. Cool. And that's it. And I was like, it's like an acceptance. It's seeing whatever pattern that you're currently running in your life and seeing what the benefit is.
Yeah.
It's like if you're sabotaging, you're not loving yourself. Give it exactly what you said. Give yourself permission.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that was actually Carl Cease on Lewis Howe's podcast over a year ago. I heard it. He goes, "We only accept love up to the level that we love ourselves," and that's still now the whole like man steps in the river twice thing happens. I'm like, oh, yeah, I understand that. I get it. Yeah, look at that. And then even just this last week, that came up again for me, and I'm like, right, okay, I'm still seeking approval or love from X people or X things or whoever they're representing as, and then I'm like, where am I not getting this? Where is it being given to me that I don't? Because if I got it, then I wouldn't want it, right? It's always conditional. Where did that come from?
Yeah,
and
exactly. You learnt it.
Yeah.
It's not you.
Yeah,
you learnt that behavior.
Absolutely,
and you can change it.
Yep. Yeah, but we first, like you said, we first have to be able to identify that. And if we don't, and if we identify it and reject it as bad, then fuck, like, good luck trying to then identify it as good and then use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
So I've told you a few times to do the Enneagram, and
I still haven't done it.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Good chat.
Yeah, which gives me an idea of your Enneagram. So
Is that judgment, Dave?
yeah, no, it's estimation.
It's certainty.
Yeah, that's right. So, but in that, well, this is the interesting thing about judgment. If I was like, dude, I really love your shirt, you're like, thanks, man. It's judgment.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, it's not good nor bad.
Yeah, it's exactly right. But a guy called Goodriff, he's that's his surname. He's I think he was kicking it maybe 130 years ago. I think he was known as a bit of an arsehole, from what I gathered, but I could be wrong in that circumstance. But he was just challenging, right? And so he was one of the guys that really fathered the Enneagram. Enneagram meaning 9 types, Greek. And one of the things he was sort of coined saying was that suffering is the last thing people will let go of. And I constantly lay that over my thoughts to think, hang on a sec, if I'm struggling with something, is it because I want to keep it around? And it's like, what part of the story is this serving by having this issue? And it's like, so if I let go of this issue and resolve it, who am I then? And then a lot of the time I start to look at this sort of stuff and how much does this suffering that I'm currently experiencing fit into my identity? And I'm like, right. And I start to see this unfold, and I see it in plenty of other people. It's like a lot of people won't lose weight because it's a part of their identity and part of their story. So why would they let go of their suffering?
Exactly.
Right? It's like, well, who would they be then?
Yeah, because
right?
if they let go, and if they've got so much shit, and some people they fulfill the need of significance by having a significant problem.
Yeah.
And it's having a significant problem is the easiest way to connect with someone without being rejected.
Yeah.
Because people understand that. The world goes, oh, I understand. I'll validate your bad back or your poor knees. I'm in pain. I'll validate your pain. Therefore, pain equals acceptance. Pain equals validation.
Yeah.
You're going to keep pain around in your life. So you'll unconsciously attract it in every way until you learn to ask the question, okay, what's the benefit of pain? I asked actually a close family member this, who complains of knees all the time. And I'm like, what's the benefit of knee pain? And there was a bit of swearing. And I was like, no, like, what's the benefit? What wouldn't you be able to do? He's like, oh, people wouldn't feel sorry for me. Ha ha ha. And I was like, and that's it. And he's like, I was only joking. I'm like, but you're not.
Yeah.
And that's it.
It's
like,
a throwaway comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you think, yeah. And
yeah, cyanide. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, cyanide and happiness, my friend.
It's like language is your world, man.
Yeah.
It's when people say they're like, oh, it's killing me. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
It's killing you.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I had a client and she talked about this issue with at work, right? And and I was the point I was making is around language, and she talked about that it got thrown under the bus, and I'm like, and what happens when you get thrown under the bus? And she goes, well, you die, and I'm like, I die? I'm like, when you get thrown under the bus, I die? I'm like, that's a fucking bad day, hey. Not only is she languaging that she saw this as death at work, she was externally referencing the issue, so she wasn't even, by saying you, so she wasn't even actually accepting that she was that was her issue to fix. And it was like going, it's really fucking interesting. But I mean, then it's like, once again, let me just hold up the mirror and go, where the fuck am I doing this? But yeah, I think it's hilarious in that circumstance, and I mean, that person's made leaps and bounds with a whole range of things, you know, in the sense of how they observe their reality and understand their language as well. But language is more powerful than we give precedence to, I believe. So.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm 6 foot.
That affirmation, Dave, will continue. It's just, Conor well, man.
Yeah,
it's already happened.
Yeah. We'll finish up shortly, but the thing I want to talk about, you said affirmations a few times, and that'll turn a couple of people off, right? But here's what I understand about affirmations, and I'm on your team with this sort of affirmation idea, is that people go, affirmations don't work for me. And we would have gone through goals, value, beliefs on the board, right? And I'm like, can you see your belief? Right? Maybe goal is to spend more time with the family. Value is they value family time, and belief is that there's never enough hours in the day. I'm like, can you see your belief? It's like it's once for what you're saying, sabotaging the goal. It's not upholding it. And I don't like I wouldn't say let's try positive affirmations, but there'd be a process there, and they go, affirmations don't work for me. I'm like, as long as they're negative, they do. And it's like, we don't realize that we're affirming shit all the time, because that's what it is. You're affirming the negative or the positive, whether you want to judge it or not, terms, and then you work perfectly the way that you wired yourself to work. And when we can understand that affirmations don't work, I'm like, well, of course they do, because the negative one that you've built works perfectly.
Yeah, and that belief creates your Reality.
Indeed. Mitch, is there anything else that you have to put in before we finish up?
No, that's it, man. It's been fun.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done a podcast before, not like this.
Right.
Losing my podcast virginity.
Yeah, well, I had to take something off you. Mate, thank you very much for jumping on today.
No, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. It was my pleasure. Next time I'll make you drink a whiskey.
Yeah.
You're like, if people want to go find out more about you and Metamorph, where can they go find out more?
So Facebook page, so it's Metamorph HPC. Instagram is at Metamorph Canberra, and then my personal Instagram is Mitch Pike _.
Underscore dot. Unfinished.
Yeah, I couldn't. I had to have the underscore. Someone else took Mitch Pike. I was like, motherfucker.
Bastard.
Yeah.
Mate, thank you very much. For those of you listening, by all means, please jump online at davidnixon.com.au/memberships. Check out Mood Prep online. If you're a PT, a coach, or an athlete, check out the Coaches Circle. Otherwise, until next time, peace and pizza. Kick today in the dick. Slay the dragon. I'll see you guys soon.